Welcome to the Julie Laughton Living Podcast, the place to get advice, tips, and tricks to building the life and luxury home of your dreams with 30-year business owner, designer, and builder, Julie Laughton. It all starts with a good plan. This is Julie Laughton Living.
Welcome back to another episode of Julie Laughton's Podcast. And today we're going to talk about remodeling vintage homes. But before we do that, don't forget to check out my 7 simple steps. It's on my website. You just click the link. You can even print it or download it or share it. And here we go. Okay, so I work in Laguna Beach and Newport Beach, and I just happen to work with a lot of people that have lived here a long time and they're generational. And that means most of their homes are vintage. And I get calls for a lot of vintage cottages because I specialize in remodels and I specialize in vintage because not only was I attracted to that when I first came here, but I kind of fell into that when I started doing the custom kitchens. And I think people knew me as the custom queen, custom designer, and most of the homes that I worked in were vintage. And I wasn't called to the fancy modern ones because that the architect that does that gets those calls first. But I always got the remodels, and I've stayed there because I love remodeling and I love vintage and I love fixing things and making things better and transforming the home. So one of my favorite projects is a house on Chiquita. Everybody knows it if they drive by because it was built in the 1920s by my client's father, and my client's about my age, and so her father's passed now, but he used to be a landscaper in Laguna Beach, and he has this yard, which we saved during the remodel, which is all these stones, and it's a Japanese garden. And he was from Japan, and it's a Japanese garden. It has a pond, 2 little ponds actually, and quartz, stone and granite, and all these beautiful rock formations he made for himself. And then he put crystals all over the place, and then he buried crystals. And the neighbors said that he would bless his yard every single day and talk to it. It's just beautiful. So we preserved it, and it's still there. And the remodel's done, and my client moved in a couple months ago, and they're just sprucing it up a little bit, but there it is. It stood the test of time, and it's thriving and loving the fact that it's got a new home sitting on the end of the property. So the garden was, maintained poorly over the years. So we had to spruce it up, added a little stone patio that had crumbled, and then put back the bare grass that grows between the rocks because it had failed and not been watered properly. But basically that's all we had to do other than line the fountain, the little pond, because it's so old, it started to crack. So that's lined, and now that works. But it was just a refresh. And the old driveway that was there from before that barely fit a real modern day car, that was turned into a walking path, like a vintage cottage storybook walking path with new plants. So it was a total transformation because the city wanted me to put the driveway in the back where the alley is. So the new old driveway, which is quite thin, which turned into the storybook path from the front white picket fence gate to the front door. So it was just charming. And it's on my website. So check out the best vintage cottage in Laguna Beach on my website. So the easiest way to bring a vintage home up to date is make sure the style is there, and it already has a style. If it doesn't, you can give it style. But the vintage homes, like this one I did on Chiquita, the house looks exactly the way it did before I remodeled it, except it's white. But I had to take the single wall construction and make it a 2x4 with insulation. So all the walls were removed and put back with 2x4 walls. And the inside and the outside were covered in TNG ceilings. And then the walls were the board and batten, because the house originally had shingles, and then before that it was board and batten. So we took multi-layers off and went back to the board and batten. So it looks the same as it was when it was built, but it's a totally new house because we have real walls and new hardy siding, which is not wood, it's concrete. So this house will last forever. So the transformation was keeping the charm of the style, but doing it with all new materials and to code. So when you're restoring a vintage home, even if it's not deemed historical by the Historical Society, you still have to keep the character, and I don't ever change the square footage or anything. I just enhance it by doing the new siding, which is usually board and batten, and then maybe adding more board and batten siding inside, because it's nice to have no drywall walls and have all the wood paneling walls. It makes it so rich and so charming and yummy inside. So that's, the trick is to stay within the theme and not, transform it into something else or a different style. So that's the trick for vintage. It's easy. So when you have a restoration versus a remodel, the restoration is seriously taking what's there and making it better, restoring it, think of an old Bentley or an old Mercedes. You're going to restore it to brand new, but you don't change anything. Now you might have to replace some chrome or repaint it and get rid of some rust, but you don't change it. You just restore it. So that's restoration. So I did a couple recently where I had to go in and just repolish everything and reseal everything and refinish everything. That's all it was. It didn't have any love and care over like 20 years. So, but then a remodel is where you tear it apart. You move the walls, you add on additions, you change the look, a new curb appeal, brand new interior, brand new windows and doors, blow it out, add a backyard. That's a remodel. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Julie Laughton Podcast, and thanks for listening about remodeling and versus restoring vintage homes. And we'll see you on the next one. But don't forget to check out my 7 simple steps and share it with your friends, or print it and download it and use it for your next remodel.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Julie Laughton Living. For more information or to connect with Julie one-on-one, visit julielaughtonliving.com. And don't forget, it all starts with a good plan.